The scanner beeped twice, then died. Again, Marcus Thorne kicked the ancient device with his steel-toed boot, muttering curses that would make his grandmother roll in her radioactive grave. 200 years underground had taught humanity many things. Patience wasn't one of them. "Still broken?" asked Riley Park, her voice echoing through the concrete tunnel that had been home to the last 3,000 humans on Earth. She adjusted her respirator mask, the one they'd all worn since birth, the one that filtered the supposedly toxic air of the world above. "Broken doesn't begin to cover it," Marcus replied, his weathered hands running through graying hair. At 45, he was ancient by underground standards. Most people died by 30 down here. Radiation poisoning, malnutrition, or simple despair took them long before they saw his age. "This piece of junk hasn't worked properly since my father's time." The irony wasn't lost on him. Here they were, descendants of the most technologically advanced civilization in human history, reduced to banging on machines like cavemen with fancy tools. Riley crouched beside the massive steel door that separated their world from whatever nightmare awaited above. The door was 3 feet thick, designed to keep the radiation out and them safely buried beneath the ruins of what used to be called Nevada. Her fingers traced the warning symbols etched into the metal, symbols that had terrified children for generations. Danger, surface contamination, lethal radiation levels. Do not open. She'd memorized those words before she could properly read. Everyone had. "What if the council's wrong?" she whispered, barely audible over the hum of the failing air recyclers. "What if it's not as bad up there as they say?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The council's been wrong about a lot of things lately. Food rations, water purification, population control." He paused, his voice dropping to match hers. Maybe they're wrong about this too. The thought had been growing in both their minds for months. The underground city was dying. Systems failed daily. The hydroponic gardens produced less food each season. Children were born weaker, sicker. The gene pool was too small, the resources too limited. But the surface was death. Everyone knew that, or did they? "The scanner's not completely dead," Marcus said, studying the device's cracked display. "It's picking up something. Low-level readings, but nothing like what the old record suggests should be up there." Riley's heart hammered against her ribs. "How low?" "Lower than down here." The words hung in the stale air between them like a confession. They both knew what that meant. The underground city's reactor had been leaking for decades. The council denied it, of course, but the cancer rates spoke for themselves. The birth defects, the slow, grinding death of their civilization. "We have to tell the others," Riley said. "No." Marcus's voice was sharp, urgent. "Not yet. The council would have us executed for even being here. You know the laws about approaching the surface doors." She didn't know. 3 strikes, and you disappeared. Everyone assumed the council sent lawbreakers to the deep tunnels to die alone in the dark. Marcus had already used up 2 strikes, questioning the leadership. Riley had 1 remaining. But something was calling to them from above. Something stronger than fear, stronger than the indoctrination of 2 centuries, hope. "Give me the scanner," Riley said, extending her hand. Marcus hesitated. If we are wrong, we die. If we are right and do nothing, we die anyway. Just slower." He placed the device in her palm. The weight of it felt like holding their species' future. The scanner's readings were erratic, but consistent in one crucial way. Whatever radiation existed above them was manageable. Not the instant death sentence they'd been taught to expect. "I'm going up," Riley announced. "Like hell you are. Someone has to. And if something happens to me, you can warn the others." Marcus grabbed her arm. "And if nothing happens to you?" She met his eyes, seeing her own desperate hope reflected there. "Then maybe we finally go home." The door's locking mechanism hadn't been used in 50 years. The manual override required 2 people, turning separate keys simultaneously. The council kept 1 key. The other had been lost to time, or so they claimed. Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a piece of twisted metal, carefully shaped and filed. "I've been working on this for 6 months, he admitted, based on the old engineering diagrams. "You magnificent paranoid bastard. Paranoia's kept me alive this long." They positioned themselves at opposite ends of the door's control panel. The original keys would have turned smoothly, designed for emergency evacuation that never came. Marcus's improvised key fought them every millimeter of the way. "On three," Riley whispered. "One." The locks disengaged with a sound like thunder. For a moment, neither moved. 200 years of conditioning held them frozen as the massive door slowly, agonizingly, began to swing open. Light poured through the growing gap. Not the harsh fluorescent glow they'd known their entire lives, but something warm, golden, alive. "Oh my God," Riley breathed, the air that rushed and carried scents they had no names for. Sweet, complex, layered with richness that made their processed, recycled atmosphere taste like poison by comparison. But it was what lay beyond the light that stopped their hearts entirely. Green. Everywhere, impossible, beautiful green. Not the sickly yellow green of their dying hydroponic plants, but vibrant, wild, chaotic life spreading as far as they could see. Trees towered overhead, their leaves dancing in a breeze that felt like a gentle caress against their faces. Flowers bloomed in colors that didn't exist in their underground world. And the sky was blue. Marcus stepped forward first, his weathered hand reaching toward this impossible paradise. "The readings," he said, his voice thick with wonder. "They're even lower out here. This place is cleaner than our city." Riley followed, her legs trembling. Every step took her further from everything she'd ever known and closer to something that looked suspiciously like the heaven their old religious text described. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "I don't know, but look at this." Marcus knelt beside what appeared to be a road, or what was left of one. Nature had reclaimed most of it, but the pattern was still visible beneath the overgrowth. Civilization was here. Recently. Not recently by their underground standards, perhaps, but not the millennia-old ruins they'd expected either. Some of the structures in the distance looked almost intact, covered in green, but still standing. Other survivors? Riley asked. Maybe, or maybe something else entirely. They spent the next hour exploring, each step revealing new impossibilities. Fruit hung heavy on trees that should have been mutated, poisoned dead. A stream ran clear and cold, tasting better than any water they'd ever known. Animals moved through the undergrowth, healthy, numerous, unafraid that it was paradise. It was everything their ancestors had lost. It was home. "We have to go back," Marcus said finally, though every word seemed to cause him physical pain. "We have to tell them." Riley nodded, but she was already planning her return, already imagining bringing her daughter up here, showing her what the world could be. The door sealed behind them with a sound like a coffin closing. The journey back to the main city took 2 hours through maintenance tunnels that suddenly felt like a tomb. Every breath of recycled air tasted like death. Every fluorescent light seemed harsh, unnatural, wrong. They found the city in chaos. Emergency klaxons wailed through the corridors. Armed guards ran past them toward the upper levels. Citizens huddled in their quarters, whispering about system failures and council meetings that had run through the night. "What's happening?" Riley grabbed the arm of a passing technician. "The air recyclers," the man gasped. 3 more went down this morning. Council's talking about population reduction protocols. Population reduction. The euphemism chilled them both. They'd heard whispers before, rumors of lists of selections. The weak, the sick, the troublesome, all quietly disappearing to preserve resources for the strong. "How many names?" Marcus asked. 500. Maybe more. Riley's daughter was asthmatic. Born weak, struggling every day just to breathe their poisoned air. She would be on that list. They separated without another word. Riley to find her daughter, Marcus to find the others who might listen. The ones who'd whispered questions in dark corners. The ones who remembered that their ancestors hadn't always lived like rats in the dark. Riley found Jade in the children's ward, struggling with another breathing attack. At 12, she looked 8, pale, thin, fighting for every breath in air that was killing her. "Mama." Jade's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Riley held her daughter close. feeling the delicate bones beneath paper-thin skin. This child, this beautiful, brilliant child, would never see 13 in this place. The doctors had made that clear months ago. But above was clean air. Above was life. Above was hope. Marcus found them in the old maintenance sector. Tom Bradley, the former engineer who'd been demoted for asking too many questions. Sarah Walsh, the teacher who'd been censured for teaching pre-war history. David Kim, the doctor who'd spoken out against the population reduction protocols. 12 people in total. 12 people who'd reached the same conclusion. Their civilization was committing suicide one regulation at a time. The surface readings are stable. Marcus told them, his voice low but urgent. Lower radiation than we have down here. Clean air, fresh water, growing things. That's impossible, Tom Bradley said, but his voice carried hope instead of skepticism. I have seen it. Riley's seen it. We have proof. The council will never allow evacuation, Sarah Walsh said. They'd rather rule over a graveyard than admit they have been wrong for 2 centuries. Then we don't ask permission. The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a declaration of war. You're talking about revolution, David Kim said quietly. I'm talking about survival. They planned through the night. A small group first to establish contact with whatever might be living on the surface, to find shelter, resources, safety. Then others brought up in small groups to avoid detection. The children first. The sick. The ones who wouldn't survive another year underground. When? Sarah asked. Marcus looked at each face in turn, seeing his own desperate determination reflected in their eyes. Tomorrow night, during the shift change, we will have 6 hours before anyone notices we are gone. And if we are wrong, Tom asked, if something up there kills us, then we die free, Riley said, thinking of her daughter's labored breathing, instead of slowly suffocating in a tomb. They dispersed before dawn, each carrying a piece of the plan, a piece of hope. Riley returned to Jade's bedside as the morning klaxons announced another day in their dying world. Her daughter's breathing was worse. The medication wasn't working. The doctors spoke in whispers about comfort measures, about making her final days peaceful. Final days. At 12 years old, Mama, Jade whispered, I had the strangest dream. I was running through grass, so green it hurt to look at. And the air was so clean I could breathe without trying. Riley's heart broke and soared at the same time. Tell me about it, baby. There were trees everywhere. And flowers. And the sky was blue, Mama. Blue like the old pictures, but real. And I could run and never get tired because breathing didn't hurt anymore. That sounds like a beautiful dream. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like remembering something I've forgotten. Riley kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting salt from tears she didn't remember shedding. Maybe it was baby. Maybe it was. The next 18 hours crawled by like torture. Systems continued to fail throughout the city. The council announced the population reduction list would be finalized within 48 hours. The air grew thicker, more poisonous with each passing hour. And above them, paradise waited. Riley packed light. Medical supplies for Jade, a few tools, some food. Everything else they'd ever owned suddenly seemed worthless compared to clean air and sunlight. The rendezvous point was the same maintenance tunnel where she and Marcus had first opened the door. 13 people gathered in the darkness. The original 12 plus Jade carried in Riley's arms. Last chance to change your minds, Marcus said, and O1 moved. Then let's go home. The door opened easier this time, as if the world above was calling to them. Golden light spilled into their concrete tomb, carrying sense of life and growth and possibility point one by one. They stepped through. Jade's reaction was instantaneous. Color flooded her pale cheeks. Her breathing, labored for years, suddenly came easy and deep. She stood on her own for the first time in months, her eyes wide with wonder. Mama, she whispered, I can breathe. And Riley knew, with absolute certainty, that they were finally going home. The first night above ground changed everything. Riley watched her daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in years. No rasping breath, no desperate gasping for air that barely sustained life. Jade lay curled beneath a canopy of stars that the girl had only seen in faded textbooks, her chest rising and falling with the natural rhythm of someone who could actually breathe. "It's not natural," Tom Bradley muttered, poking at their small campfire with a stick. The flames danced higher than any fire they'd ever seen underground, fed by oxygen-rich air that still felt almost intoxicating. Radiation doesn't just disappear. Nuclear fallout has a half-life measured in thousands of years. "Maybe it never existed the way they told us," Sarah Walsh suggested. She'd been studying the ruins of what appeared to be a small town just beyond their makeshift camp. "Look at these buildings. Some damage, yes, but not the complete devastation we were taught about." Marcus emerged from the tree lean, carrying an armload of fruit that had no right to exist. Apples, he thought, though they were larger and sweeter than anything in their historical records. Found an orchard about half a mile north. Trees are old, maybe 50 years, but healthy. Someone's been tending them. Someone. David Kim looked up from where he'd been testing water samples from the nearby stream. Every test came back cleaner than their best underground filtration systems. "You mean other survivors? Or something else entirely?" The possibility hung in the warm evening air like smoke from their fire. They found evidence of habitation everywhere. Maintained paths through the forest, cleared areas that suggested regular use. Even what looked like recent tool marks on some of the trees. But no people. No voices. No signs of current occupation. "We should post watches," Tom said. "If there are others up here, we need to know their intentions." Riley didn't argue, though something in her gut said they were safer here than they'd ever been in their underground prison. Call it instinct, call it desperation, but this place felt like sanctuary rather than threat. The watch rotation was interrupted just before midnight by something none of them had expected. Music. Not the harsh electronic sounds that pass for entertainment in their underground world, but something organic, complex, beautiful. It drifted through the forest like mist, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "That's not human," David whispered. Riley found herself walking toward the sound before she'd consciously decided to move. The melody was hauntingly familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby from childhood dreams. Others followed her, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. They found the source in a clearing about a quarter-mile from their camp. The beings around a larger fire were definitely not human. Tall, graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer in the firelight like polished copper. 4 fingers on each hand instead of 5, but the hands moved with practiced precision across instruments that looked like nothing Riley had ever seen. Their faces were angular, almost geometric, but their eyes held intelligence, compassion, and something that might have been amusement at the sight of 13 humans stumbling into their clearing like lost children. The music stopped. "Well," one of the beings said in perfectly accented English, "it's about time you came up." Marcus stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife at his belt. "You speak our language. We speak many languages. Yours is particularly melodic, though somewhat limited in expressing complex temporal concepts." The being stood, revealing a height of nearly 7 feet. "I'm Keeper Voss. We have been waiting for you. Waiting for us." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "How long?" "Oh, roughly 200 of your years. Give or take a decade." The clearing fell silent, except for the crackling of their fire and the whisper of wind through leaves that shouldn't exist. "That's impossible," Tom said. Voss tilted his head in what might have been a shrug. "Your species has an interesting relationship with impossibility. You create weapons capable of destroying worlds, then hide underground for centuries because you assume you have succeeded." "We did succeed," Riley said quietly. "The war was devastating, yes, but not apocalyptic. Your leaders simply preferred to maintain control rather than admit the surface was habitable within 50 years of the conflict's end." The words hit like physical blows. A century and a half of unnecessary suffering. Generations born and died in artificial twilight because their rulers chose fear over freedom. "You are lying," Tom said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Voss gestured toward the healthy forest around them. "We helped, of course, accelerated the natural healing process, guided the regrowth. But Earth was never as damaged as your underground leaders claimed. Why? The question came from Jade, who had woken and followed them to the clearing. She stood beside her mother, breathing easily, color in her cheeks for the first time in her life. Why would they lie? Voss knelt to bring himself closer to the child's eye level. Power, little one. Fear is the greatest tool of control ever devised. A population that believes the world is ending will accept any restriction, any sacrifice, any loss of freedom if they believe it means survival. But some of us figured it out, Marcus said. That's why we are here. Yes, and that is why we waited. True change never comes from those in power willingly relinquishing it. It comes from those brave enough to question, to risk, to step into the unknown. Sarah was studying the other beings around the fire. There were perhaps a dozen of them, all watching the humans with what seemed like benevolent interest. What are you? Where did you come from? We're what you might call gardeners. Caretakers. We have been tending worlds for longer than your species has existed. When your war threatened to destroy this beautiful planet, we intervened. Aliens, David breathed. Such a limiting term. We prefer to think of ourselves as neighbors. We have been living alongside humanity for millennia, usually unseen. Your mythology is full of references to us, though rarely accurate. Riley felt a strange sense of pieces falling into place. You have been protecting us, in a manner of speaking, though protection and interference are delicate concepts to balance. We could have ended your underground exile decades ago, but forced salvation rarely produces lasting change. You had to choose to emerge. You had to choose freedom. And now, Marcus asked, now you face a choice. Return to your underground prison with the knowledge that your leaders have lied to you for generations, or help us restore this world to what it was meant to be. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. The others, Riley said suddenly, there are 3,000 people still down there. Children dying of radiation poisoning that doesn't exist. Families being torn apart by population reduction protocols based on lies. Yes, Voss said simply. What will you do about it? The answer formed in Riley's mind with crystalline clarity. They couldn't just save themselves. They couldn't just walk away from the suffering they'd left behind. We go back, she said. We tell them the truth. They won't believe us, Tom protested. The council has too much power, too much invested in maintaining the lie. Then we show them, Sarah said, her teacher's instincts taking over. We bring them up in groups. Let them see for themselves. The council will stop us, David pointed out. They will use force. Marcus smiled grimly. Let them try. We have something they don't. What's that? The truth. And apparently, some very powerful allies. Voss stood, his copper skin seeming to glow in the firelight. We will not fight your battles for you, but we will provide what assistance we can. Tools, knowledge, sanctuary for those who emerge. Why? Jade asked. Why help us at all? The being's angular features softened into something that might have been a smile. Because, little one, your species has something precious that many civilizations lose along the way. What's that? Hope. Even in your darkest hour, even when faced with certain death, humans continue to hope, continue to fight, continue to choose love over fear, even when it costs them everything. He looked around at the small group of refugees who had risked everything for the chance at a better life. That is worth preserving. They spent the rest of the night planning. Voss and his people provided tools that seemed almost magical. Communication devices that could reach the underground city, portable air purifiers that could demonstrate the surface's breathability, and something called truth serum that could neutralize the controlled drugs the council had been putting in the water supply for decades. Control drugs. Another lie. Another level of manipulation that made Riley's stomach turn with rage. How long have you known? She asked Voss as dawn painted the sky in colors she'd never imagined. About the drugs? Since they began using them. About the lies? Since the first generation died in unnecessary captivity. About your emergence? We have been watching the door seals for vibrations for the past 6 months. You knew we were coming. We hope you were coming. Hope, as I said, is a powerful force. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Riley and half the group would return underground, spreading word quietly among the families with sick children, the workers who questioned the system, the people who had already begun to doubt the official narrative. Meanwhile, Marcus and the others would establish a proper camp on the surface, with Voss's people providing shelter and supplies for the refugees who would hopefully follow. "How many do you think will believe us?" Sarah asked as they prepared to descend back into their former prison. "Enough," Riley said, though her voice carried more hope than certainty. "Parents will do anything to save their children. Workers will listen when you show them their radiation badges have been rigged to show false readings. People are already suspicious. We just need to give them proof." The journey back down felt like traveling into hell. Every breath of recycled air burned her lungs after the clean atmosphere above. Every fluorescent light seemed harsh and artificial. Every concrete wall felt like the bar of a cage. But now she knew the cage door was unlocked. Word spread faster than they'd expected. Within hours, small groups were gathering in maintenance tunnels, in abandoned sections, in any space where the council surveillance couldn't reach. Riley showed them recordings from Voss's devices, images of blue skies and green forests. David distributed his test results showing the true radiation levels. Sarah shared historical documents that revealed the timeline of lies. The response was immediate and powerful: rage. Pure, righteous rage at the generations of unnecessary suffering to be why the third day. They had over 400 people ready to make the journey. By the fifth day, half the city was involved in the conspiracy. The council finally noticed on the seventh day, when the population reduction protocols were supposed to begin and no one showed up for processing. The armed guards came in force, sealing corridors, demanding compliance, threatening execution for treason. But something had changed in the people. Fear had been replaced by fury. Desperation had been replaced by determination. The revolution began not with violence, but with walking. Families simply packed their belongings and walked toward the surface doors. When guards tried to stop them, more families joined them. When the guards raised weapons, the crowd grew larger. "You cannot leave," Council Chairman Roberts shouted over the chaos. "The surface is death. You will all die. Then we die free," someone shouted back. Riley thought it sounded like Tom Bradley. The crowd pressed forward. The guards, outnumbered 100 to 1, hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, Riley made her choice. She stepped forward and pressed her palm to the door control. The massive seal cracked open, spilling golden light into their concrete tomb. Behind her, 3,000 people saw sunlight for the first time. The exodus took 3 days. Council forces tried to maintain order, but their authority crumbled when faced with the simple, undeniable truth. The surface was paradise, not prison. Voss and his people had prepared for the arrival. Temporary shelters appeared, as if by magic. Food and clean water were abundant. Medical facilities were established to treat the effects of generations of poisoning and malnutrition. But the real miracle was the children. Kids who had never run freely began to race through meadows. Children who had struggled to breathe their entire lives suddenly found themselves able to laugh, to shout, to sing. Families that had been torn apart by artificial scarcity came together under skies that seemed infinite. Riley found Jade on the third evening, standing in the same clearing where they'd first met Voss. Her daughter was taller already, stronger, her skin glowing with health that had seemed impossible just days before. "Mama," Jade said without turning around, "did you know the stars tell stories?" "What kind of stories, baby?" "Stories about people who forgot they could fly, and then remembered." Jade finally turned, her eyes bright with wonder and possibility. "Voss says that's what humans are. People who forgot they could fly." Riley pulled her daughter close, breathing in air that smelled of freedom and hope. Around them, the first human settlement on the surface in 2 centuries was taking shape. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments about resources, disputes about leadership, the inevitable friction of people learning to live without fear. But it was theirs. It was free. It was home. "What happens now?" she asked Voss, who had appeared at the edge of the clearing with his characteristic silent grace. "Now you rebuild. Now you remember who you were meant to be. Now you teach your children that the sky is not a ceiling, but an invitation. And you? Will you stay? The being looked up at the stars, his expression thoughtful. For a while, there are other worlds, other peoples who have forgotten how to hope. Other gardeners are needed elsewhere. We see you again. Perhaps. Or perhaps your children will, when they are ready to tend their own gardens among the stars. Riley smiled, understanding at last. Humanity's story wasn't ending with their emergence from the underground. It was beginning again. Behind them, in the ruins of the underground city, emergency lights flickered and died. The last symbols of 2 centuries of artificial fear finally went dark. Above them, the stars wheeled in their courses, bright with promise and infinite possibility. And somewhere in the distance, a child laughed with the pure joy of someone who had just discovered they could breathe.